Hello, my name is T. Ramus, and this is Cooking Up Crime. What is happening? Okay, basically this is where I talk about true crime while I eat various foods. Today, we have this rice that I made. It's got curry in it, it's got beans, it's got tofu, it's got various veggies. The purpose of this video series was supposed to, I would order out food and then eat professionally made food, but because we're in quarantine and I have social anxiety about ordering things on apps and going to pick it up in the store, we're not doing that. So primarily the food will be easily accessible, store-bought, or at home made. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the Chicago Tylenol Murders, which took place from September to October in 1982 in the Chicago metropolitan area. Oh my lord, this rice is good. On September 29th of 1982, Mary Kellerman was 12 years old and she lived in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, and she was basically having cold symptoms. She had a sore throat and a runny nose, and she had asked her parents what to do, and they had told her to go get a Tylenol. She then took one extra strength Tylenol and then went to sleep. Unfortunately, she died. Then Adam Janus was 27. He lived in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and he was a postal worker. He had basically died in a hospital, and they assumed that he had died from a heart attack. But then under further investigation, it was identified that he actually did die from taking his Tylenol. This part is just wild. So Adam Janus had a it doesn't matter. Had a brother who his name was Stanley, and he was 25. And Stanley had a wife named Teresa who was 19. They went to Adam's house where the whole family was, and they were grieving their dead brother. In the grieving process, Stanley and Teresa had gotten headaches, and they had taken Tylenol as well, and Stanley died that day, and then Teresa had died 2 days later. Now, nobody knew that Tylenol was the reason why the people were dying at the time, so you can't really blame them for being I have a headache from all the crying, and I gotta take something for it, you know? It's just really odd because right now, I have a very negative opinion of Tylenol. I think of it as the devil. I would take an ibuprofen or an Advil before I took a Tylenol ever. I don't really know why. I think it has something to do with cancer. I don't really know why. Maybe my messed up childhood. Over the next 3 days, Mary McFarland was 31, Paula Prince was 35, and Mary Rayner was 27, and they all lived in the Chicago metropolitan area, and over the course of the next 3 days, they too died from taking Tylenol. After Tylenol was decided to be the culprit for all these murders, there were tests being done on all the capsules, and it was determined that all the capsules had been laced with cyanide, which is a very lethal poison, in case you didn't know. This is 1982, and this is before the media and technology and stuff. So the police literally just drove through streets and neighborhoods and suburbs and this town and the city, whatever, blaring sirens, broadcasting the information about Tylenol to its people. All the different bottles from Tylenol actually came from different manufacturers, so the police ruled out a manufacturer issue or a disgruntled worker in a factory there because it came from different factories. Because all of the deaths had occurred in Chicago and Tylenol was a nationally distributed medicine, a disgruntled worker at Johnson & Johnson, who was the company that owned Tylenol, I didn't even know that, but whatever. It was ruled out that a disgruntled worker for Johnson & Johnson had been the culprit. The police kind of concluded that a person had gone to several retail stores and several pharmacies and gathered up as much Tylenol as they could over a process of several weeks, and then put cyanide-laced capsules back in the bottles and then put them back on shelves. So we'll get into this later, but this is before prescription bottles and things and different pill bottles had seals on them. This, I believe, was even before they had child locks on the screw tops. There was 5 additional bottles that were linked to the Tylenol murders, and then the police actually found 3 additional bottles that were still on shelves but tampered with cyanide. Johnson & Johnson, we'll get into this a little bit later, but Johnson & Johnson did a great job at responding to this. They actually recalled all of their Tylenol. They ran promotions and advertisements instructing people on the issue. They notified hospitals and distributors and actually advertised against using their product, which would not happen today at all. On October 5th of 1982, Johnson & Johnson did a nationwide recall on Tylenol. 31 million bottles were in circulation, which is about $265 million worth of product today. It was $100 million in product back then, but now it would be $265 million, and they recalled all of this Tylenol. And basically, when a recall happens, the company kind of just eats that money. After recalling all of their products, it was decided that the only products tampered with were acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. It's the scientific scientific name for Tylenol. So the Washington Post actually praised Johnson & Johnson for their response to all of this. They were very honest, and they basically just like came up front and were like, this is an issue and we're going to solve it, and we're going to bite the bullet, and we're going to take the hit for it. Johnson & Johnson was also additionally praised because they did have a relationship with the Chicago police, the FBI, and the FDA, and established relations with them to catch the culprit, and they played an active role in trying to catch whoever was doing this. The way stocks kind of work, out of over-the-counter drugs, Tylenol was 35% of the market, meaning that you get all of the stocks. I assume this is what this means. You get all of the stocks from over-the-counter drugs, and you find the value of all of them. Tylenol was 35% of that value, but it then dropped to 8% of that value. But actually within a year, Johnson & Johnson did rebound and got back to their 35% stake, which was attributed to their honest response of the situation. In November of 1982, Johnson & Johnson redistributed Tylenol with a triple sealed package. Alan Hilberg was a communication and branding consultant hired by Johnson & Johnson, and he said at the time they believed that they were never going to be judged for the problem of the Tylenol, but they were going to be judged for their response, so they had to do that appropriately. Tylenol was actually up for a name change by Johnson & Johnson, but then they actually rejected the idea of renaming it. I'm assuming because it had a brand already, and they didn't want to bother with rebuilding a different medicine's brand. How Johnson & Johnson responded to the situation by being honest upfront and just taking the hit is actually used in college business classes today as examples of what to do. And still to this day, businesses just don't, they're not with it. In my research and stuff like that, they just kept saying how wrong businesses are reacting today. And it's that's so true. People even Johnson & Johnson recently did something kind of shady, and they're just not honest about it. And they don't, even when they do something wrong, but they're still not honest about it. And that's just dumb. The whole Facebook sharing information thing. Facebook don't come for me. Allegedly, Facebook shares information. Allegedly. Reportedly, don't come for me. In early 1983, Bob Greene was working for the Chicago Tribune and was asked by the FBI to release Mary Kellerman's gravesite and also home address, and her family consented to this. John Douglas was a criminal analyst for the FBI, and he thought that the criminal would go and visit the grave or her house if he or she knew where they were. But both locations went under 24-hour surveillance for several months. The killer never made an appearance. How upsetting, That's a lot of storage for back then to do surveillance. Did they have video in 1982? I wasn't alive, I don't know. Paula Prince, who was a victim I mentioned earlier, was photographed buying her tampered Tylenol bottle by surveillance, and there is a bearded man behind her, and the police suspected that this may be the killer, but they never found him. The suspects. James William Lewis was a tax consultant, and he had sent Johnson & Johnson a ransom letter being I'll stop the Tylenol murders if I get $1 million. And let's dive into James William Lewis. He was charged in 1978 with a murder in Kansas City, where pieces of his client were found in bags in his attic. Now, that's sketchy. The judge, however, threw the case out because the police illegally searched his house. How upsetting is that? They got the evidence illegally, but it's still there, you know what I mean? He still committed a crime. He still cut somebody up and put him in little bags and hid him in his attic. That's a very fine line of ethics. The police ran his fingerprints, and they also did something with the envelope, I'm not really sure, that he sent to Johnson & Johnson with the ransom letter, and both were not matched to anything being found. And actually, him and his wife were living in New York at the time, so they weren't even near Chicago. However, he was convicted of extortion and served 13 of a 20-year sentence before being paroled in 1995. A news station in Boston actually said that the Department of Justice actually believed that James Williams Lewis was the person responsible, but they just didn't have enough evidence against them. I only found one article that said that, so I'm not really sure if that's true. In January of 2009, the FBI ransacked his house, legally this time, did not give any information to the public about why, did not give any information to the public about what they found, about anything related to the raid. And in January of 2010, a year later, him and his wife were asked to give DNA samples, as well as fingerprints. Lewis was quoted saying that if the FBI played fair, he had nothing to worry about. So I don't know what that means. I guess it's he's worried about them taking the Kansas City murder and then trying to make it seem like he did this Tylenol murder to get him for the Kansas City murder because they're upset about it because they messed up. I don't know how you can be upset about that. But to this day, he denies all responsibility. Roger Arnold was identified, investigated, and cleared by the police because of the media coverage surrounding him. He actually had a nervous nervous breakdown and tried to kill a bar owner, Marty Sinclair, because he blamed Marty Sinclair for all this media coverage. I don't know if Marty Sinclair like blamed him or was like, that's the guy, but he ended up trying to shoot and kill Marty Sinclair, but actually shot John Stanisha and killed him. And it's upsetting because John and Roger had never met prior to this unfortunate meeting. In 1984, he was convicted of murder and served 15 of a 20-year sentence, and he died in June of 2008. In 1988, so about 6 years after the Tylenol murders, Lori Dan was responsible for poisoning and shooting multiple people in Winnetka, Illinois. I don't know how you say that. And she was considered by the police to be a suspect, but no evidence has linked her to that crime. Ted Kaczynski, I don't know how to say that, the Unabomber, was suspected, and he was asked to give over his DNA and fingerprints, and I believe he rejected. It doesn't say if he did or did not. I don't really know if you have a say in that matter at that point if you're like a convicted felon. He denied ever owning potassium cyanide, but his parents did live in the Chicago area and he did go stay with them quite frequently, so we have no idea. So he would have like kind of like a motive and like kind of like an accessible way of being in the Chicago area to do this. Also, the first 4 of his murders as the Unabomber, we'll go into that case maybe in a different video, but his first 4 deaths actually occurred in the Chicago area, so police kind of like were considering this. Immediately following the attack, there was actually a bunch of copycats. There was hundreds of cases where people were tampering with Tylenol and other over-the-counter drugs to poison people. Just in the following, like the next month, following the Tylenol murders, it was reported by the FDA that over 270 different cases were reported with tampering of over-the-counter medications. 3 more deaths occurred in 1986 from tampered gelatin capsules. A woman ended up dying in Yonkers, New York, from taking a cyanide-laced capsule of Tylenol. Susan Snow and Bruce Nickel were killed in Washington State from Excedrin laced with cyanide, but they were killed by Bruce's wife, Stella. I'm assuming maybe they had an affair and Stella was not happy about it, but she was tried and convicted for murder. We'll get into this later, but anyway, I don't know what this is, but Encaprin, I'm assuming it's like a Tylenol type thing, was actually recalled in Chicago and in Detroit for having a hoax about being laced. Haven't been doing much eating. In 1986, a University of Texas student, Kenneth Ferries, was found dead in his apartment from taking a cyanide-laced capsule. On June 19th of 1986, the medical examiner actually ruled his death as a suicide, where he obtained cyanide from his place of work. He worked in like a warehouse manufacturer place thingamabob. This was actually the case that made pharmaceutical companies, food companies, and different packaging of consumer products. This case made them be more proactive in the way they package their goods. It was because of this case that they also made different tamper-resistant packages. So hence Tylenol's triple seal, the child lock thing of the that screwy top thing you gotta push, that's real aggravating, those things. As a result, product tampering was made a federal crime, and it's because of this that Stella Nickel, the one who killed her husband and his mistress, his reported alleged mistress by me, Matthew, she got a 90-year sentence and was sentenced to prison because of this law. Kind of like ironic that she was gonna like copycat the killings of cyanide-laced capsules of Tylenol, and she tried to do that to kill her husband and his mistress, reportedly, allegedly, but then it was because of the Tylenol murders that she got a 90-year sentence. Pharmaceutical companies moved away from the capsules and moved towards capsulettes, which were basically pills in the shapes of capsules. Johnson & Johnson actually used this design to reintroduce their Tylenol at a lower price after all this happened. And unfortunately, the person responsible was never found, but this case was freaking wild, man. Like, you got people just dropping dead like flies because they're taking some Tylenol. That's like crazy. That's like, I'm gonna drink this water because I'm thirsty, and that's gonna kill me. You know what I mean? That's wild. Anyway, if you have a case that you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments. Or like this video, dislike the video. Do whatever you want. Live your life. Share it, please. Subscribe. You know the drill. Anyway, I did take a week off last week. The idea was that I was just drowning in my exams, and that was the reason. Not a good reason, Matthew. Not a good reason. I will see you. Today's Tuesday. This video should be up on Thursday, and I will see you next Thursday. I just like Thursdays better. I don't know, man. Whatever. Bye.
I want you to forget your past lives and find me the new Christ. I want your heart to melt like ice in the midst of July.